Hello, I am Mary Frances Winters, Chief Executive Officer of the Winters Group, and this is the Inclusion Solution Live. And this time we are talking about justice for all. And I am so delighted to welcome back Celeste Warren to our podcast. Celeste, I really appreciate you doing this once again. You have such wonderful insights about this work because you've been doing it for quite a while. So we are so happy to have you back. And for those of you who don't know Celeste Warren, she is Vice President, Global Diversity and Inclusion Center of Excellence at Merck. And as the leader, she's responsible for working with Merck's global leaders to advance and embed diversity and inclusion throughout the organization to enhance the employee experience and maximize business performance. And I can tell you, because we have worked with Merck, that she's doing an amazing job. They have a really wonderful record in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is why I wanted to have Celeste back on the podcast. She joined Merck in 1997 and has held numerous positions of increasing responsibility. She has been recognized for her work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, including Black Enterprise's top executives in global diversity and inclusion, Savoy Magazine's Diversity Global, Influential Women in Global Diversity, Diversity Women Magazine, Elite 100, and the list goes on and on. She also serves on the boards of RWJ Barnabas Health Systems, and Paradigm for Parity. She is also a member of CNBC's Workforce Executive Council and World 50's Inclusion and Diversity Impact Community. So you can see she has a lot of experience and has been recognized for the forward-thinking work that she does, and is just a vanguard in this work. She's also published. She's a published author, and her articles on diversity, equity, and inclusion have been featured in numerous national and global publications. She has had the opportunity to speak at various events across the world. She attended the University of Kentucky, where she earned a BS degree. She earned a master's degree from Carnegie Mellon. She is the wife of John Warren and the mother of two children, Christina Celeste and John Stephen Jr. So she has a wonderful and long history within diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I love that your bio included something about your personal life as well. You are so well-rounded and just have so, whenever we talk, Celeste, I just learn so much, and I'm just, filled with so much of your wisdom. So we appreciate you being here today. So welcome back.
Well, thank you for the invitation. And it's always good to come back, Mary Frances.
Oh, thank you so much. Right. So, let us know, on the last podcast, I probably asked you the same first question, because we ask all of our guests the same first question. How did you come to this work, and what inspired you to do this work? You've been doing it now at Merck for 10 years. How did you get into it?
Well, I like to say that I was indoctrinated into this work at a very, very young age. My father was the first Black teacher and Black principal in Western Pennsylvania. And so, and also Eastern Ohio. And so every day he would come home and we'd be sitting at the dinner table. My siblings, I have 4 siblings, and mom and dad. And, mom would ask dad, how was your day? Like any other family, discussion would start. And we got a firsthand, I guess, view of the struggles that he had gone through as the first Black teacher and first Black principal in that area, and then also how he overcame them. So it was just ingrained in me as a little girl, and understanding about the inequities and the different challenges that people of color and various people of all different identities have. So that was just ingrained in me, and throughout college, throughout high school and college, and throughout my career, that's basically kind of how I viewed things through that lens. And so I worked at Merck, came to Merck, 27 years ago, was in the human resources organization, supporting all of the different areas, the research division, the manufacturing division, the commercial division, all the support functions. And 10 years ago, my boss asked me, hey, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something. And we had a regular one-on-one. And normally we would just do it over the phone because we were in two different locations. and and she said, you know what, can you come over so we can talk live for a one-on-one? And I was like, okay, what did I do wrong? And so I came over to her office and she talked to me about taking over the Diversity and Inclusion Center of Excellence. And she said, I know how you feel about this role. And how I felt about it was I was very passionate about it. And I was able to, wherever I went and whatever part of the organization, I was able to really do the work that I needed to do in that space and integrating DE&I into what I was doing because I had control over that area.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about doing it enterprise wide, not having not knowing if you have the buy-in from hundreds of leaders globally, that was daunting. And it was something that, hey, if I'm passionate about it, I want people around me to be passionate about it and help me to drive it. And I just wasn't sure if I was going to get that support in that type of a role. And then also too, it was isn't that sort of cliche? The Black woman is the head of diversity and inclusion. And so that was going through my mind as well. And so anytime that I was asked about it, I would just say, no, I'm not really interested. It's not something that interests me at this point. And so she asked me again, and she said, Ken Frazier was our CEO at the time. Ken and I really want you to take over this role. We've not been having the success that we had seen. And we really know that you can take it and take it to the next level. And I thought, oh, here's my out, because she said that Ken wanted to talk to me about it. And I thought, oh, well, Ken's a busy man. He probably won't have a chance to talk to me for another month or two. So, I was like, that's my opportunity to kind of, backpedal and get out of this. And she said, and I said, yeah, I'd love to talk to Ken. That's great. So she grabs my hand. We stand up. She walked me over to Ken's office right at that moment.
Oh my goodness. I didn't know this part of the story. Oh, wow.
So I was like, okay, I'm not going to get out of this. So Ken and I, had a good conversation, and Ken is very inspirational. He's definitely someone who challenges you and gets you to perform at another level. And so we were sitting in his office and talking. And I said, look, Ken, I just have one question. Are you serious about this? Because if you're asking me to do this, I want to know, are you serious? And he looked at me and he said, this was probably about a half hour into the conversation. And he looked at me and he said, well, Celeste, if I told you I wasn't serious, what would you say? And I said, I was sitting there thinking to myself, I didn't say this to him, but he had already sort of convinced me that this was something that we needed to do. So by the time I asked him the question and he said that, I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, it's too bad now, because we're going to go and you're going to go with me, and we're going to do some things here. And he said, that's what I wanted to hear. That tells me that you're ready to take this on, and I am going to be supporting you throughout all of it. And the rest, as they say, 10 years later is history. And he was a great supporter. He was a great confidant. He was a great leader, and still is after his retirement. But that was the story that got me into this role.
Wow. And I know that you've invited me in a couple of times.
Yes.
And I remember the time that you invited me in when it was the 100 top global leaders that you had.
Top 200. Yep.
Top 200. Okay. The top 200. And just the esteem and respect, for you that I saw there, and the response from the leaders. Of course, I didn't talk with all 200. However, there was just an aura in the room, and an atmosphere in the room where it was obvious that people were listening, that they, cared about this. And I think, you were talking about your passion. I think over the 10 years, it's obvious that you've been able to instill that passion in the leaders, because of all the many organizations that I go into, I was really just so inspired. And the side conversations, with the leaders. Oftentimes, I'm in an organization and they all run out, after my session, so they don't have to talk about it. But I noticed that your leaders, I'm sure not all 200, but for the most part, there was an overwhelming, acceptance and curiosity. So, you've really done a great job, because it starts with the leaders, right? I mean, it starts with leaders being committed. And so, lots happened in this space, and you've been in the work for 10 years. What changes have you seen? And not just at Merck, but just sort of in the field. And, how is that playing out for you? And where do you think this work is going?
It was interesting. When I got in this job 10 years ago, I remember attending a CDO roundtable, and it was in New York, and it was a smaller one. Mm-hmm. It was only about 15 or 20 chief diversity officers across. It was McDonald's, AT&T, a group of us were there. And it was one of my first ones that I attended when I got into this role. And I asked the question because I wanted to understand where the industry, the DE&I industry, kind of where we were at that stage. And this was 2013, 2014. And what I got from the leaders at that time was, well, Celeste, we haven't seen the change that we've wanted to see, frankly, in our respective organizations and across the DE&I footprint. It was kind of disappointing. It was, it just struck me as the fact that I was in DE&I in a previous company 20, 30 years ago, but at a level where I was a HR business partner, and I had the region of the company I was at, and I was also the regional DE&I point. So there was like a hybrid role. And I traveled around the South doing different, workshops at the different plants that we had and facilities that we had. And where it was 30 years ago. So I had been out of it for that period of time. And I was asking them kind of, where are we now? And it was just kind of disappointing. What they said overwhelmingly was, we haven't excelled as much as we would have liked to. And I asked, well, why? What's been happening? What's getting in the way? And there was a lot of different reasons, priorities and DE&I falling below its business priorities, and this happening and that happening. And so I took what I learned and I said, we have to look at it from a perspective of not just it's the morally nice thing to do or the right thing to do, but we really have to think about it in a different way, and not just from a representation standpoint. Representation is the foundation. It will always be the foundation of the work that we do. You need to have a diverse work environment, and so where you're welcoming and having that sense of belonging for anyone, regardless of how they identify. But 10 years ago, when I got into this role, there was such an emphasis on workforce representation, not even culture, but it was about how many this do we have, how many that do they have, how many women do we have, et cetera, and looking at it very myopically.
Right.
And so, when I got into the role, my journey was, doing the listening tour, understanding both internally and externally where we were. And that was sort of kind of how people looked at it. And from a global standpoint, they didn't even want to talk about diversity and inclusion. They felt it was a U.S. concept, and traveled around the world. It was, well, that's a U.S. concept. We don't need to be thinking about that here. Don't bring that thinking into our country. We don't have those problems. And so it was just a very, very interesting dynamic to just going year after year, first of all, expanding our definition of how we looked at diversity and inclusion from the standpoint of understanding how it's good for business, not just
Right.
from a it's the right thing to do, but from a business perspective, and really understanding and dissecting our business in the pharmaceutical industry and saying, how is it that we're going to achieve our mission of saving and improving lives
Mm,
through D&I, through that lens. So
mhm,
that became really a focus for me in helping understand that. Understanding the culture as well became a focal point for me, because there was such, I would get the data. We were conducting culture surveys, and I would get the data and I would look at it from all different identities,
mhm,
generations, race and ethnicity in the United States, ge- um, globally, generations, gender, by band level, by different areas of the world, to see if there was a difference between how one community of employees viewed the culture versus the majority. And so we started looking at that as well. And then as I was traveling around the different countries, I had to expand their understanding of diversity and inclusion. And how I did that was I started talking to them about the haves and the have nots in their countries, and
mhm,
asking them questions around from the historical perspective, the history
mhm,
of their
mhm.
country, and and political, social, economic conditions, all of that. And at the very end of the conversation, I would slip in the words diversity and inclusion. And then their hand would go up and like, oh, don't bring that here. And I said, well, what do you think we've been talking about for the last hour? And I had to expand
Mhm,
their
mhm.
understanding of what diversity was. And I would explain to them, I said, every country around the world has those, they have the haves and they have the have nots.
Right.
And you, as a country leader, need to be able to explain and understand that from a historical perspective of your country, how
Mhm.
that's manifesting itself today, and being able to close the gap between the haves and the have nots. You identify who those groups of identities, those identities, who they are, and do something to fix it. That's what
Right.
diversity and inclusion is about. And
Right.
so the first, I would say, 5, 6 years of my tenure in this role was spent doing that and focusing
Mm,
on that. Still doing the groundwork, the
right.
foundational work of improving the representation as well. And so, fast forward, it's so funny. We rewrote the strategy in 2018, 2019 to the focusing on the pillars that we have now: our people, our culture, our business, and our world. And we worked on the strategy most of 2019, and then pencils down, did it, worked on the change strategy as well, how we were going to be implementing it. And then I told my team, I said, I want you to go home for the holidays, the break in December, and I want everybody to get their rest, because when we get back in January, we're going to be out, implementing the strategy and also doing the change in communications aspect of it. And so we got back in January and started the communications and change strategy, started implementing the different aspects of the strategy. And lo and behold, March 2020 hits, and the
Mm,
whole world shuts down. And I
mm,
tell you, Francis, it was so funny, because people were coming up to me and saying, "Oh my God, how are we going to implement DE&I? Is this going to just like freeze the work that you've been doing?" And I said, "Well, no, we are a global company. We're in over 120 different countries. Our change in communication strategy included the fact that we had to leverage different technology to reach the masses." And so, yes, it's nice to have the face-to-face meetings, but in the face-to-face meetings, you're only hitting how many people that you can hit.
mhm.
You have to be able to take this message to the masses across 120 or so different countries and markets, and be able to do this. And that's what our strategy entailed from the beginning. And so, my meetings and the different events and things that I would have, they were always um, hybrid. So you have
Mhm,
people in an auditorium or in a room, but you also have webcasts and webinars and all of
mhm,
that as well, and you record them, so people in Asia Pacific region, they can listen to it at their leisure, and other
mhm,
people can listen to it. And I said, think about our commercial organization, our sales and marketing people. our salespeople work out of their home offices. They work going to physicians' offices. They don't come to a building, like office, a office and those that are in those types of support function jobs. So they've been doing it for their entire careers. We
Right.
take some lessons and learn from there. And so the only enhancements that we made in the March, April timeframe was really focusing on inclusive behaviors in a virtual
Mhm.
environment, and so there are things that you need to understand. You're looking at the chat more. You're looking at um, people's, making sure cameras are on, making sure that you're looking at the body language of people, putting it in gallery view, right? So you can see everybody, all of these things that we didn't really think about as much before the pandemic. And so that was sort of integrated into our strategy. And then lo and behold, May hit, and the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and all of those different, where the world just basically was forced to look at the inequities that were happening with COVID, the health inequities, the murders, all of these different things. And it was a perfect storm. And so, I would always get the question around that time, like, oh, what did you do? Did you have to like do things differently? Did you have to do this? Did you have to do that? And I said, no, we always had a strategy. We were moving forward with it. The only thing was a lot of people, their ahas, that light, that what do you call it? That bubble in the cartoons went off
Right.
and said, wow, okay, I need to learn more. And so
Mhm.
we just basically kind of steered them to our learning resources. And the stuff was there. They just didn't have an appetite to go and read it and understand it and internalize it. And so we just steered them to all of the learning resources. We beefed up bold inclusive conversations and really got more people certified in it, thanks to you. So they understood how to talk about it, because they didn't even
Mhm.
understand how to talk about it. And so, it really just opened the door for more people to understand and want to understand. I would say that was the only biggest difference. And so now here we are trying to keep the momentum, because remember, everybody kept saying, is this a moment in time or is this a beginning of a momentum?
Mhm.
And trying to make sure that that didn't happen. And unfortunately, where we are today, we're seeing sort of the pendulum kind of swing a little bit, especially in the United States, where people are weaponizing diversity, equity, inclusion. And so we've had to be um, smart about how we've approached it, but we're continuing with our battle. And the questions now are, oh, are you stopping what you're doing? Are you changing what you're doing? Are you calling it something else? What are you doing? And I say we're continuing with our strategy. We're assessing what we should be doing in this new environment, but
Mhm.
we're not stopping what we're doing by any means.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
they'll ask, well, a lot of these companies, they're getting rid of their DE&I organizations, or they're stopping these different things and programs. And I said, well, if you looked at DE&I as a program, then you didn't really think about it in the right way. DE&I is part of our business strategy. Do you look at your business as a program? And if your business in that way, you can't be successful. And it's the same thing around DE&I. It's a strategy. It's foundational to what we do across creating an inclusive environment across our business, and our commitment to the world as well, and our obligation to the world as a Fortune 150 company. So that's basically kind of how this journey over the 10 years has gone. And it has been an interesting journey, as you know, Mary Frances. We talked about it in 2020. But you were just like, I have to expand. I have to do. Remember when we were talking about that, and to make up for the demand that people had for understanding it.
Right. You know what I'm hearing you say, and thank you so much for that. That was really wonderful. And I hope that our listeners were catching all of those nuggets. And one nugget that I heard was that it took those 5 to 6 years to lay the foundation and to go across the world and listen to the leaders talk about who were the haves and the have nots. We might use words like the in group and the out group in your environment, because everywhere in the world, there's an in-group and an out-group. That power dynamic, exists. And you may not, I don't care if you call it diversity and inclusion is what you were saying, but you got them to come around to recognize that there were inequities, that everybody was not treated equitably. And who is it in your culture, your geographical, region, that are not treated equitably? And then you went back to the vision and the mission of Merck, which is what now? Say it again.
To save and improve lives.
To save and improve lives, and to save and improve lives all around the world, right? And if there are certain groups that are being left out, right, and not being treated equitably, so you could take it right back to the vision of the organization. The other thing that I heard you say was the importance of strategy, that you took the time to develop the strategy. It wasn't something that you developed in, a month or 2 months, right? And it took a year to develop the strategy. I think I heard you say.
Yeah.
And then you told the team, now go off on your Christmas break and come back, right? And we're going to start implementing. The other thing I heard you say is that the strategy has not changed. The goals, I guess, of the strategy have not changed, but how you implement those goals may change given the external environment. So if you're solid with your strategy, and that strategy is known around the world, your action steps to implement that strategy may change, but the strategy and the goal, is still there. So, and I've also heard from others, those organizations that are shutting down their diversity and inclusion departments and whatnot. What I'm hearing is that those are the organizations that just started after George Floyd. They had nothing before George Floyd, and then they put something together, but they didn't have that strategy and they didn't build that foundation. I'm hearing that those organizations like Merck that have this deeply embedded into their business structure and their business strategy are staying the course. That's what I heard you say, staying the course, right? That you have the strategy. I don't know if you're changing your language. I didn't hear you say you're changing your language at all. Good. I advocate for people to not change the language because there's just so much misinformation. As you say, weaponization, people don't recognize that diversity, equity, inclusion is for everyone, which is why we're talking about this podcast series being justice for all. I think that when people heard, after George Floyd, this is just about race, and there's just such an aversion in this country to isolate race and racism. And I think that's obviously a problem. It has been a problem. However, I think what I'm hearing you say is that it's not stopping the work, and you do your audit work so that you can segment your data by race, by gender, by generation and age. And so have always included race and ethnicity as a part of your examination, and you will continue to do so because it is a part of the diversity. It is a part of the diversity spectrum, right? Yes,
absolutely.
So those people who don't get it. So we've used the broad umbrella of racial justice at work. We wrote a book called Racial Justice at Work, and what we believe is that if we can get a handle on racial inequities, it'll be a whole lot easier than to address other kinds of inequities that we have in the world. The other thing that I heard you say is that preparing leaders to have the conversation to enhance the understanding was so important, and that you have embraced our Engaging in Bold Inclusive Conversations Facilitator program so that you can spread the scale, so that you can scale the work. So tell us a little bit more about how that's worked out.
Oh, that has been fundamentally what has helped us to grow from the standpoint of creating that inclusive culture. Back in 2020, many of the African Americans said that, I didn't even hear from my manager. I didn't hear, how are you doing? There wasn't a check-in. And the managers and leaders that just naturally have that EQ, they, reached out to their African American employees. They said, how are you doing? If you need to talk, please just let me know, anytime. But there was another pocket of folks who said, I haven't even heard from my manager. It's like business as usual. They're having meetings and we're talking about budgets and this and that and blah, 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 blah. And they haven't even checked me to say, how are you feeling? Are you okay? And so we knew that was a problem. And even like since then, the xenophobia that happened in the Pan-Asian community,
Right.
The atrocities that happen with persons with disabilities,
Right.
and the LGBTQ plus community,
The
anti-Semitism. I mean, the bold, inclusive conversations, having a framework for being able to connect with your employees, to have that conversation with your peers in a productive manner was so very critical to us being able to enhance and nurture an inclusive environment. Because basically the bottom line is, people will say, well, your diversity, it just seems like you're causing separatism. And it's like, no, diversity is differences. It's differences in people. We all have differences, right? And so inclusion is how you're leveraging those differences to create a much more powerful workforce. And that's going to help you achieve whatever your mission might be. And by the definition of inclusion is everyone is included in that journey, right?
Right.
Not exclusion. It's not diversity and exclusion. It's diversity and inclusion.
Inclusion, right.
And so helping people to understand it. And how you do that is being able to understand and have a framework for how you're having conversations and difficult conversations. And even outside of diversity, equity, inclusion, like it's a great framework for having any type of a difficult conversation. Performance reviews, right? You're going to have a difficult performance review because the way you view your employees' performance and the way that they view their performance, big wide gap. Use the framework to have that conversation.
Right.
So especially if you guys are from different identities, because that can sometimes get in the way too, right? But it's just a great framework. And I tell you, Mary Frances, I preach it to everybody, my peers across the different, conferences that I go to. And I just give you a shameless plug because.
Well, thank you.
So it's just so important. If people do not know how to talk to each other, and I'll never forget Ken Fraser having this conversation with me at one point. He said, if we can't get our employees, our managers, our leaders, everybody talking to each other, we will never get to the state of inclusion that we want in this organization. And he said it so profoundly, and he was absolutely right. We have to get to a point where we're not afraid to have the conversations. Yeah, they're going to be difficult at first. It's going to be uncomfortable. That's okay, right?
Yeah.
Losing weight.
There are a lot of things in life that are difficult, but we do them.
Exactly it. We want to do them. And so we have to do this. And I tell you, it has been foundational to the work that we have been doing. You got to have the conversation and the dialogue.
You have to, and as you know, what we promote is that you have to have the skill to have the conversation. And so that's what Bold Inclusive Conversations does, is let me develop the skill to have that conversation. And part of that skill, as you mentioned earlier, is the curiosity, is wanting to understand what those differences are. Like when you were saying that you went around, the world, and you were talking to the leaders about who are the haves and the have-nots. You set a great groundwork to be able to come to some kind of common ground, right? And that's part of the model. So there's a common ground that says, a shared meaning that says, oh yeah, we agree that we have these haves and have-nots, right? So now we agree on something, right? Now I can take you to the next level, right?
That's exactly it.
Right. I spoke your language, well, not literally, but I mean, I spoke in terms that resonated for you because they were relevant to your culture. And I think that's part of the conversation. Oftentimes in conversations, people are trying to debate, prove their point. My point is right. As opposed to stepping back and saying, what are those things? Why do I believe so deeply in this? Why am I so stuck here? Am I open, to hearing a perspective, even if I don't agree with that perspective, I can understand that that person has that perspective because of their lived experiences, right? And I can learn more. So I think that's a great place for us to to close the conversation. This has been absolutely amazing. And, one of my questions was, what does justice for all mean to you? But you've already explained what justice for all means. You're talking about 120 some countries. You're talking about all of the different identities and intersectionalities. And how you are, attuned to, all of those. And there is some pushback, even, using the term justice. So I will let you end with that. What does justice for all mean to you, or what does even justice mean to you?
Yeah, it's so funny. My father used to say, when he would hear someone say, "Well, that's just not fair,"
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not fair.
Right.
And my dad would say, fair is something that you go to when you want to see a pig. And he said, life is not fair, but he said you have to work towards justice. You have to work towards equity. You have to work towards that, because what's fair in one eye
Mm-hmm.
is not fair to another eye, right?
Exactly.
And so for me, justice is part of it is not looking at this work like it's a pie, and there's an infinite, there's a finite set of resources, a finite set of opportunities, etc. We have to look at it like a bar chart. And the bars can go up as high as we want them to. We don't want it to be a situation where, well, if you're gaining, I'm losing.
Right.
We need to have an honest conversation, dialogue across the world, really, about, no, everyone wins. So when we talk about true justice for all,
yes,
it means that everybody wins. And that's the way that I have to approach it. So people don't feel that it's a win-lose game.
right.
And that's not what it's about.
Wow. Oh my gosh, this has been so powerful. Absolutely. I love the bar chart, analogy that everybody can win. It's not a fixed pie, right?
Yeah.
So justice for all. Thank you, Celeste Warren, from the bottom of my heart, for again helping us. I think that our listeners are going to just be so enriched by this conversation. And until next time, keep working toward justice for all. Thank you.